Bugatti's story is one of both success and sadness. For you to understand what I'm saying, let's go back 100 years to a basement in a house in Germany. Ettore Bugatti had just finished making his car, so he quit his job and went to France to start his own business. During the next few years, he made some of the fastest and most expensive cars ever made. This made him one of the best engineers of his time. But despite all of his success, Ettore's life fell apart all at once when he had to give up his company and never found out what the Bugatti name had become. So, fasten your seatbelts, because we're going to take a trip through Bugatti's amazing rise and fall and how it came back to become the best luxury hypercar brand we know today. Ettore Bugatti was born in Milan, Italy on September 15, 1881. His father, Carlo Bugatti, was a well-known furniture and jewelry designer in Milan, and his grandfather was a well-known architect and sculptor. He grew up in a middle-class home. This love and skill for art ran deep in their family, and Ettore's younger brother, Rembrandt, got them from him. Rembrandt was 3 years younger than Ettore, but he was already a great sculptor, even better than his bigger brother. Many historians think that Ettore didn't become a sculptor or follow in his family's path because of how good Rembrandt was. Still, this artistic background would show up in a different way. Ettore was always good at engineering, even when he was young. He was so talented that at age 16, even though he had never been to school, he was already making complicated drawings. Ettore fixed a broken bike quickly and well in front of his father. Carlo could see right away that his son Ettore was talented, so he told him to get an apprenticeship at Prenetier and Stucci, a well-known shop at the time for making sewing machines and bicycles. Ettore agreed, and when he was 17, he started working at the factory. A year later, Ettore made his own motorized bike while taking part in a race from Paris to Bordeaux. 2 engines made by De Dion were used to power the motorized bicycle. It was a good idea to let Ettore work at the Prenetier and Stucci company, but it would also introduce him to a whole new world of motor designs, cars, and speed. Ettore found his calling in this place. Ettore left Prenetier and Stucci in 1900, when he was 19 years old, to build his own car. He was an expert by nature, and would draw out every part of the car he designed, from the engine to the body. He also made sure that all the parts that went into his car were made right. This became a routine for the rest of his life. He was a very exact, detailed, and mathematical person. Some of his designs were so hard to understand that not even the most experienced engineers of his time could figure them out. The company De Dietrich, which had factories in both France and Germany, finally noticed how good he was. The company often hired Ettore to build and create cars for them. Even though he was only 19, he got his first professional deal. Since he was still a minor, his father had to sign the contract with him. Ettore had to move from the city of Milan, where he was born, to the German town of Niederbronn for this job. There, he worked for a few years and learned more about his trade. He made improvements to cars and even raced them. In 1903, for the Paris-Madrid race, he built his second car. But this car was so far ahead of its time that it could not even race. Ettore put the driver and the engine low in the car's frame because he thought this was best for the center of gravity and the way the car would move through the air. But everyone else thought it was strange. At the time, every other car builder thought that having a higher seat was the best way, but this type of race car would soon become the standard. Ettore thought it was time to leave De Dietrich in 1906. Around this time, cars were made one at a time by very skilled craftsmen. Because of this, they were very expensive, and most people who could afford them were very rich. Most of the time, the cars were used for racing, which was quickly becoming a famous sport in both Europe and the United States. Ettore met Barbara Josefina Mascher in 1907. She would become his wife a few years later. In the same year, Ettore signed a long-term deal with a fuel engine maker in Cologne, Germany, called Deutz. During his time at Deutz, Ettore made engines that were bigger and more powerful, which was standard at the time. But by that time, he had his own ideas about how to build his engines, ideas that went against the way things were done at the time. Ettore thought it would be possible to make a small, light, and very light vehicle. He also thought that such a car would perform better than cars with much bigger engines. To do this, he started working on a new car in the basement of his house. This new car, the Bugatti Type 10, would be the first car with the Bugatti name. In 1909, the Type 10 was finally done. The result was a four-cylinder engine with a capacity of 1.2 liters that weighed only 365 kilos. At the time, the fact that this two-seater car could go as fast as 80 kilometers per hour was an amazing feat. At this point, he quit his job and drove his new car to the Alsatian town of Molsheim, where he started his own business called the Automobiles Ettore Bugatti. Ettore was one of the first people to show off the abilities of his cars in racing events. He became more well known as one of the best car makers in the country after he did this in front of a big crowd. In the car business, this soon became the rule. Bugatti's life changed a lot in 1909, and it was also one of his best years. It was the year he finished the Type 10 and started his company. More importantly, it was the year he had his first son, Jean Bugatti. Even though the Bugatti Type 10 was a great car that was way ahead of its time, Ettore thought it could be even better. The Type 10 would become the model for one of the most famous cars ever made, the Type 13. Bugatti made its predecessor better by adding leaf springs to the rear axle and putting 4 valves on each cylinder to make a cylinder head with 16 valves. This meant that the 30 horsepower made by the new Type 13 was enough to move the 300-kilogram frame. Bugatti and its new car went on to finish a respectable second in the 1911 French Grand Prix. This solidified Bugatti's reputation as one of the world's best car makers. Bugatti kept making cars that used the same engine as the Type 13, all the way up to the Type 23. When the First World War started, however, everything stopped, including the making of his cars. After seeing that the war went on for a year and a half, Ettore had no choice but to move back to Milan and then to Paris, where he worked with the Duesenberg brothers from 1915 to 1916. He came up with the exciting Bugatti U16 engine, which was basically 2 straight-line engines that shared a chassis. The U16 wasn't very successful on its own, but it did inspire Bugatti and the Duesenberg brothers to come up with the straight-8 engine and the overhead camshaft. After the war was over, Ettore went back to Molsheim, which was now part of France, and kept making lightweight sports cars. He made the Type 13 with an engine that had more than 1 valve, and the result was amazing. At the 1920 Le Mans, his new car helped him win. In 1921, the car won at Brescia. After that, it won 3 more times, and people started calling it the Bugatti Type 13 Brescia. The winning streak went on until 1925. By then, his cars had won more than 400 races. Before 1926, 2,000 Bugatti Type 13 Brescia prototypes were made. This made it one of the most popular Bugatti cars ever made. Ettore showed off his Bugatti Type 35 at the Grand Prix in Lyon in 1924. His new car quickly became Bugatti's most famous racing model, winning more than 1,000 races over its lifetime. Bugatti kept winning races well into the 1930s, most famously at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1937 and 1939. In the latter race, the driver was Pierre Véron, whose name would come to be associated with the car company. Ettore Bugatti and his first son, Jean Bugatti, got into the luxury car business after trying out different types of race cars. They started working together on a new vehicle, and by 1926, the Type 41 Bugatti Royale, Bugatti's first luxury car, was on the road. The Type 41 was the result of both Ettore's brilliance and his technical skill, which went beyond the creation of cars. At the time, it was the world's largest and most expensive car. Bugatti was very picky about who could buy the Type 41. Only kings and other high-class people of the time were allowed to buy it. Because of this, the Type 41 was called the Bugatti Royale. With the release of the Bugatti Royale, Ettore's company became more well-known. However, a huge change in the world economy would soon put Ettore's company in danger of failing. The Great Depression hit America 3 years after the Royale came out. This economic downturn had a big effect on the rest of the world's economies, and sales of the one popular book Royale went down sharply. In the middle of the 1930s, the company's finances were so bad that it almost went out of business. Bugatti was asked by the French government to build and make rail cars in its factories. Bugatti took the offer because he had no other choice, and his company was about to go out of business. He helped the French government build 80 Bugatti rail cars that were successful. This helped him get through the Great Depression and kept his company from going bankrupt. But just as things were looking up for Bugatti, there was a strike at the Molsheim, France, factory. The workers asked for higher pay and better places to work. At first, Ettore said no, but in the end, he gave in and did what they wanted. This made Ettore's workers feel like they couldn't trust him, and the problem was never fully solved. Ettore Bugatti became known around the world as one of the best mechanical engineers of his time, as he built boats, plane engines, and trains that could go over 100 miles per hour. Ettore's son, Jean, was also a great partner for him because of his skills. Jean was an engineer who loved his job and was just as smart as his father. Ettore put Jean in charge of the Bugatti factory, and thanks to Jean's creativity, new Bugatti models were made that everyone in the world wanted to see. Models like the well-known Atlantic, the beautiful Royale, and the Type 57, which won the 24 Hours of Le Mans race in 1937 and 1939. He was the perfect son and Ettore's dream come true. Everything was going well for Bugatti at the time. But one moment can change the way your whole life goes, and that's what happened to Ettore. In June 1939, Bugatti's Type 57 tank had just won the Le Mans race for the second time in 4 years. 2 months later, Jean Bugatti took the car out for a test drive on the road. As he had done many times before, he was behind the wheel. Then, all of a sudden, a strange biker appeared out of nowhere. Jean jerked the car to the side to get around the rider, but he crashed into a tree and died right there. When Ettore heard the news, he started crying. Rembrandt, his younger brother, had killed himself during the First World War, and now he had also lost his best son and the perfect child. Just 3 weeks after he lost Jean, the German army entered Alsace and took over Bugatti's factories, making things even worse. Ettore had known about the threat, so he moved a lot of the gear quickly to Bordeaux. However, this wasn't enough. When the Germans found him, they asked him to help them make bombs and cars for their army. But he said no. Ettore also had a lot of debt at that time, so he reluctantly decided to sell the company and the equipment for less than half of what they were worth. Bugatti and his family ran away to Paris. There, he tried to forget his pain by making airplane engines and torpedo boats, but neither of them worked. Bugatti lived most of his life in France, but he was Italian and never tried to become a citizen of France. So, when the war was over, the French government didn't back him. And because Italy had been on the side of the Germans, Ettore was accused of working with the Germans. After the war was over, he tried to get his business back by suing the state, but he lost. When Ettore's wife Barbara died in 1944, things got even worse. He was going through the worst time of his life. He went back to Molsheim one last time, but his plant was in ruins and his house was empty. Even though his health was quickly getting worse, he didn't give up. Ettore tried to get back what was properly his by applying to become a French citizen. Then, in 1947, when Ettore was 66 years old, his health got worse. He had a lung problem and had had a bad stroke by this time. Eventually, during this time, his company was brought back, and Ettore's things were given back to him. But Ettore had already lost all of his mental abilities, and his situation was getting worse. So the good news didn't help him. Ettore Bugatti died just 10 days after his company got back on its feet. The people in his family who were still alive were not able to keep making his cars, so the Bugatti plant had to close and was left empty for many years. The Bugatti company didn't make anything new until 1987, when an Italian businessman named Romano Artioli bought the company and brought the Bugatti brand back to the world. 5 years later, the Bugatti EB110, a totally new model, was shown to the public. This new car could go as fast as 213 miles per hour, and it became a big deal very quickly. People all over the world were impressed by how powerful and flashy the car was. But only 139 were ever made before Bugatti went bankrupt in 1995 because of bad management. We weren't exposed to the supercar brand we know today until Volkswagen bought the Bugatti name in 1998. In the late 1990s, the new company showed off a few idea cars at auto shows. Then, for the next few years, they kept quiet while they worked on a new car. The Bugatti Veyron was made available to the public in 2005. It quickly became one of the most popular cars in the world, breaking the record for the fastest road-going production car ever made by going 254 miles per hour. The Bugatti Chiron, another supercar success, took the place of the Veyron in 2015. In 2019, the company broke the record again with the Bugatti Chiron, which now goes 305 miles per hour and is the world's fastest road-going production car. This is the story of Bugatti and of a man whose dream lives on long after he died in a terrible accident. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to it, and click that bell.